Welcome back to another segment of biology. Once again, this is a production of the Division of Education, Innovation and Energy e-learning program. I'm Lenetta Clarke, your tutor again for today. In today's objective, we would like to explain natural selection, differentiate between natural and artificial selection. Here are some peppered moths. In the previous session, we understood that variation results in diversity of species. As you can see, we can have color variation in moths. We will have black and white peppered moths existing at the same time. As you can see here, we have both white and black peppered moths occurring at the same time. Remember that variation can be a result of mutation caused maybe randomly or as a result of some kind of exposure. So we have both types of moth existing at the same time. In England, in the mid-19th century, moths rest on tree barks. So we have a picture of a tree bark here, and this is where the birds will find them. In this picture, you can see a black peppered moth, but the white peppered moth is quite camouflaged. Here we have the white peppered moth. Birds eat moths. So which moth do you think the birds will gravitate to first? Yes, obviously the one that is not camouflaged. However, in the mid-19th century in Europe came the Industrial Revolution. And along with that came factories and industries, which, of course, they use a lot of coals, they burnt them, resulted in soot and pollution being released into the atmosphere, which would have darkened the barks of trees. And the result of that would be what you see here. A bark of tree is now dark, and now we have the reversal of what was happening before the Industrial Revolution. Again, our peppered moths liming on the tree barks, but what do you observe? The dark peppered moth is now camouflaged, whereas the white peppered moth is more highly observed or easily seen. So the birds are obviously going to select the moth that they would see first over the ones that is camouflaged. And that is what we call natural selection. Natural selection is known as the survival of the fittest. The best adapted organisms are able to survive. And if they can survive, then they are going to pass their genes on to the next generation. So they have been, in the case of the black peppered moths, they were selected for natural selection. So in the case of the peppered moths, before the Industrial Revolution, we had both moths existing. However, if we look at the white circles, these indicate or relate to the white moths, their numbers fell over time to under 100. Whereas after the Industrial Revolution, we had the black peppered moths represented by the black squares, their numbers increasing because they were now well camouflaged and not selected again. So the white ones were eaten, and the black peppered moths were able to survive and reproduce and pass on that mutated gene until they became the dominant existing moth at the time. Another popular example of natural selection is Darwin finches, also known as the Galapagos finches. These birds exist on different Galapagos islands. Think about the Caribbean chain of islands. Well, we have the Galapagos Islands are also a chain of islands. And what Darwin observed was that there were different types of birds or different types of finches on different islands. And what really made the finches stand out was the fact that their beaks were all different. and that was based on what their diet was. So birds' beaks on different islands were uniquely adapted to different food sources. In one particular island, and they were able to study this within recent times, on one particular island there was a drought, and that resulted in the survival of only the birds with large beaks, because they were the ones who were able to successfully find food, and they were able to reproduce and pass their genes on to the next generation over time. So the birds with the smaller beaks were selected against the birds with the larger beaks. And here we have another example of natural selection that has the medical field in great concern, or having great concern, and we call this the bacterial antibiotic resistance. So in this cartoon, imagine that you have some bacteria here. They're all alike, but in the next generation, randomly, there was a mutation, and that resulted in a new strain of bacteria being formed quite randomly along with the others. So here's another mutant bacteria, all of them existing at the same time. When an antibiotic is introduced, we have the removal or the killing of one type of the bacteria. So let us say, for example, this pink colored one here, they died out. However, some bacteria still remained. These over time, because they survived the first dose of antibiotics, they were able to survive, and they were able also to reproduce. So here we have the bacteria reproducing and making more of its kind. As with anything else, we have mutations occurring. So in this particular case here, we have a mutant bacteria being formed along with the parent bacteria. Introduction of another batch of antibiotics resulted in the destruction or the removal of some of the bacteria. However, this one survived. And that is a concern, because we now have a strain of bacteria which survived different doses of antibiotics, and they are able to reproduce and make more of its mutant strain. Next. Artificial selection is also known as selective breeding. Humans selectively breed plants and animals for traits which suit our needs. So, for example, we have the wolf, which is the common ancestor of all our domesticated dogs that we know today. So, we as humans have been selectively breeding dogs based on different characteristics that we would like to see in our dogs, whether it's for alertness, whether it's for their temperament, whether it's for their aggression, or their cuteness, or their size. What we do, we would, over time, selectively breed a particular dog with a particular trait with other dogs that have the same trait to create the version of the dog that we would like to see. So this takes a very long time, and breeders try to make the mutant gene become the dominant characteristic. Here's another example of artificial selection in the agricultural field. We have the wild mustard plant, which has been artificially selected to produce totally new plants based on the characteristic that we're looking for. So, for example, the cabbage has been selected based on the structure of the terminal buds from the wild mustard plant. Brussels sprouts, kale, all of these started off from a common ancestor from the wild mustard plant, and they were selected for different characteristics, like the buds, the leaves were selected for, and those produced kale. The stems and the flowers of the wild mustard plant were selected and selectively bred to produce the broccoli that we eat now, and some sections of the flowers were selected to produce the cauliflower that we know now as the cauliflower fruit. Other examples of artificial selection are racehorses, which are selected for speed. Cows are selected for premium milk or even for their meat. We have rabbits selected for fur. And we have roses, for example, for a particular scent or a particular color. So we have been artificially selecting different parts of plants for a very long time now. However, artificial selection has its disadvantages. For artificial selection to be successful, it must include or involve inbreeding. And this has problems associated with it. So we have, in most cases, the new organism is more susceptible to environmental changes, and the whole process is quite time-consuming. So let's recap. We looked at natural selection, and we discussed what natural selection is. It's about survival of the fittest. Those who have the characteristics to survive in their environment are able to pass their genes on to the next generation. We looked at the importance of natural selection, and finally we looked at natural selection versus artificial selection or selective breeding. I do thank you. Be sure to join us as we continue on this journey together. Be safe, stay inside.